In 2015, this man achieved fame by claiming he could do the impossible.
Tam O'Braan was a man who started a company called the Wee Tea Plantation, and he claimed to be one of the first tea growers in Scotland.
Tam's claims went viral and his success in Scottish tea was unparalleled.
And also, we understand it's a favourite of the Queen.
There was a claim that it was given by the Scottish government to Barack Obama.
And yet when reporters started to ask questions about his tea, some things just didn't add up.
There was always a reason why she couldn't see behind the curtain.
It took years for these lies to come out, and in the meantime, Tam O'Braan made over £500,000.
And just the way he comes out with these lies, and he's doing it with such expertise. Like, you would believe him. I would believe him. Some of the stuff he's saying.
But why did so many people believe him? And why did it take so long for the truth to come out? Well, it turns out Tam O'Braan used some very persuasive psychological behavioural science tactics, which we'll talk through today.
My name is Jaega Wise. I am a brewer, a broadcaster, and I'm a food journalist as well.
Jaega first heard about the Scottish tea scandal while working on the BBC food programme, and on that programme, she got to try some Scottish tea.
Scottish tea is quite simple. It's tea that's grown in Scotland. And if you think about some of the places in which tea is grown, so places like India, China, Kenya, and you think about some of the climates in those regions, Scotland doesn't naturally fit within that growing geography. But the claim goes that because you are able to grow tea in places that are very mountainous, so places like Darjeeling, for example, you can take some of those skills and try and input it into Scotland. But the marketing and the branding goes, well, you can grow it in mountainous areas, in places of India, in places of China. You should be able to grow it in Scotland too.
I think this sounds fairly believable. If tea can be grown in the highlands of India, why can't it be grown in the highlands of Scotland?
O'Braan imported trees from the foothills of the Himalayas before allowing them to acclimatise to Scotland's own harsh climate. The fog, rainfall and rich soil has in fact proved ideal for growing, and O'Braan says the cold produces a chemical stress in the leaves that actually helps create the appealing sweet flavour.
It sounds reasonable, and to be fair, Tam is not lying. Tea can be grown in the highlands of Scotland. Jaega has tried some.
So I'm very lucky on the food programme. We do get to taste a lot of food and drink, which is fantastic. So I've tasted a lot of tea in my time at the food programme, but Scottish tea was something quite unique and quite different. And I got the opportunity to taste it blind against other well-known teas from around the world. And this particular brand that I tried was called Kinettles Gold. It was grown in Angus, and it had a very fruity floral note. It was almost like a blackcurrant hint to it. Visually, it was a lovely golden orange hue, and it was really quite delicious and very easy to pick out of the 3 tea samples that I tried. So there is a uniqueness to it, but that uniqueness has a potential high price point.
Which makes you think that buyers of Scottish tea would surely do some due diligence. If they're spending 10 or even 100 times more on a kilo of Scottish tea rather than Indian black tea, you'd think that they would want to know a lot more about the person who was actually growing the tea. So what due diligence did they do on Tam?
Tam O'Braan was a man who started a company called the Wee Tea Plantation, and he claimed to be one of the first tea growers in Scotland. He was claiming to both grow tea in Scotland and also have the knowledge in order to procure and grow plants. So there was 2 sides to this story. He was selling the finished product tea-wise, the tea leaves, and he was also selling plants to other potential growers. His real name was Thomas Robinson. He claimed all sorts. So he claimed to be a tea expert. He claimed to be a scientist, a chemist. He was in the army. He claimed he invented the bag for life.
That is right. Tam O'Braan did claim that he invented the bag for life. And at this stage, you might be thinking, how on earth did so many people believe this guy?
Apparently, he was a gentleman that came across as a bit of a country gent, very charming, and he fooled a lot of people. So a lot of people bought plants from him, and he was able to sell his tea that he claimed he grew in Scotland to the highest end of hotels possible. So places like the Dorchester, the Balmoral in Edinburgh, Fortnum Masons, and he fooled the media. So we had all sorts of publications covering this story, the highest end publications, including the BBC.
The BBC recorded several interviews with Tam O'Brien, including this interview, which aired on The One Show, which at the time was getting around 5 million viewers per episode.
Surprisingly, here in not-so-sunny Scotland, we are now producing our very own home brew. The Wee Tea Company have become the first ever plantation in the country.
Most marketers would kill for this level of promotion. So how did Tam manage to get this amount of media attention?
A lot of it was good old-fashioned charm. So he was a very charming man. When you hear what others say about him, he's someone you wanted to trust. But there is that element of the whole tea industry wanted this story to be true.
The BBC covered it, the AFP covered it, and even the CCTV, which is the national broadcaster for the People's Republic of China, covered it as well.
Now let's meet a man who has led several lives. A soldier, an agronomist and an entrepreneur. Tam O'Braan now grows tea in the foothills of the Scottish Highlands and is the envy of those who once called him crazy.
It was done with very little scrutiny because the story was just so incredible. But he made a massive effort to just be in front of a lot of cameras and to get the word out there in the press. And the press really ran with this story. It was an exciting story. It's a story about provenance. It's a story about a Scottish producer doing something unique that hadn't been done before. The media definitely bit.
Jaega actually tracked down and interviewed one of the people who interviewed him in 2016 and asked that interviewer, how did you fall for his lies?
It was interesting because one of our sister programs is a program called On Your Farm, BBC On Your Farm. And it was a producer and presenter called Kaz Graham who went to speak to Tam O'Brien and had him on the show. It's an interesting one because he'd kind of set it all up so that she didn't go to his actual production facility. There was always a reason why she couldn't see behind the curtain. It was too late in the season. There was this happening. There was this plant down, etc., etc. There was always a technical reason. So they ended up on the show meeting at another production facility that wasn't his. So when I spoke to Kaz, it was really interesting hearing from her perspective, and the fact that she said she probably wouldn't do anything differently because it's a very difficult kind of fraud to catch, and especially when you have the world's top tea buyers who have got tea sommeliers, tea experts on their side. So as far as the due diligence, you're looking towards them saying, oh, okay, well, God, it's obviously gone through several layers of tea expertise to be able to be sold in these kind of establishments.
The finest hotels and restaurants in the world, in Paris, London, Edinburgh, New York. And also, we understand it's a favourite of the Queen.
Tam claimed his tea was drunk by famous people in famous locations.
His tea was being sold at the Dorchester in London and at the Balmoral in Edinburgh, two of the UK's most luxury hotels, and media reports continued to fuel his popularity.
There was a claim, obviously we can't say whether this is true or not, but there was a claim that it was given by the Scottish government to Barack Obama.
Tam even claims he got the idea from none other than Winston Churchill.
The idea of growing tea in Scotland is not new. It was originally offered by Winston Churchill. And if we could have grown tea in Scotland the way he wanted, we would have ended up without so many lives being risked.
The Queen, Winston Churchill, Barack Obama, there is no evidence that any of these people actually drunk his tea. So why did he claim this? Why did he lie about this? Well, I think it was because he knew he could benefit from a very powerful behavioural science principle known as the halo effect. Put simply, the halo effect means that the positive impressions the people have of the Dorchester and of Obama will start to spill over onto Tam's brand, boosting his perceived quality and credibility without any real evidence. One 2023 study in the Journal of Marketing investigated this. Here, 4 researchers created ads for fictitious products. The ads were identical except for one crucial difference. In some of the ads, the researchers would claim that the product was created in collaboration with a very well-known university. Across 7 experiments, the researchers found that the university co-developed products were perceived as more attractive and more innovative. People were willing to pay 65% more, 16% more likely to click on the ads, and 2.46 times more likely to recommend these co-developed university products. Barack Obama, Winston Churchill, the Queen. This is a calculated and almost definitely fictitious use of the halo effect designed to make Tam O'Brann's tea seem far more attractive than it really should have been.
The reputational gain that he had from very big companies accepting the tea and also selling the tea also helped as well.
But despite all of these positive associations, some doubts about Tam O'Brann's tea started to emerge.
The doubts actually begun quite early. So there's one particular woman called Beverly Wainwright, who Tam O'Braan actually called at the beginning of the wee tea plantation. She said she became suspicious the minute she saw the tea. She said when she looked at it, the tea looked Chinese to her. It had very large tips on it. And he also said some other things that were suspicious. Number one, was selling a huge quantity of tea. So to give you an example, Scotland at the moment, they are able to produce, as a tea industry, kilograms of tea. He was selling tons. He also claimed to be selling tea 2 years after growing it. And Beverly says this is just impossible. He also started claiming that he was making Scottish matcha, which is just not possible. It's an incredibly complex process. He began to say he was making Scottish oolong, and that in particular requires quite complicated equipment. And there was just no evidence of any kind of equipment or production. There's no pictures, there was no one who was able to look behind the curtain of his factory.
But doubts alone are not enough. To catch him, the Scottish Crime Agency needed some help.
There was a big part to play by Aberdeen University. So they developed a test that showed a relationship between plant chemistry and the soil it's grown in. So they were able to gather samples from the other tea producers in Scotland and able to create almost a fingerprint. And they were able to do the same for tea grown in other regions around the world. And they tested the tea that he claimed was his, and it really gave them pretty irrefutable proof that the tea that he was producing was not grown in Scotland. It then goes to the Crown Prosecution Service, and Tam is now serving 3.5 years in jail, and he committed over £500,000 of tea fraud.
Mr O'Brien told the court today his arrogance made him believe he knew best. Jailing him to 3.5 years, the judge said this £550,000 scam had taken significant and complex planning and wasn't victimless.
The tall tales of Tam O'Braan weren't limited to tea. He told people he'd spent years living in a canoe on the Amazon, that he'd been an army bomb disposal expert, and that he invented the supermarket bag for life. During his trial, prosecutors said he'd lied to everyone he encountered.
There's one problem with this story, though. There's one thing that doesn't add up. Tam O'Braan didn't just get away with it just because of his lies. He partly got away with it because most Brits actually know very little about the tea they're drinking.
Yeah, there is a shocking lack of tea knowledge within the UK, considering we're such high tea consumers. So a lot of consumers do think tea is grown in the UK, which, well, there is some tea being grown in Scotland, but the majority of our tea obviously does not come from the UK. It comes from places like India, Kenya, China, Sri Lanka.
On the food programme, Jaega reported that 20% of Brits think that Yorkshire tea is actually made in Yorkshire. Now, this sounds ridiculous. It doesn't sound true. And yet, when you look at the packaging for Yorkshire tea, you start to get an understanding as to why so many people might think this. Here is a packet of Yorkshire tea. The logo reads, Tailors of Harrogate, Yorkshire tea. The box is covered all around with idyllic paintings of the Yorkshire countryside, small brick cottages, little red doors, a cricket match, sheep resting, castles in the background. It is all very British. On the underside of the box, you get the product's detailed information. There's a section on brewing instructions, on how to recycle, their brew promise, but there is nothing on origin yet. For the ingredients, it just reads black tea, not Indian black tea or Sri Lankan black tea. In fact, there is just one line on the whole product packaging which alludes to the origin of this product. It reads, blended and packed in the UK. There is nothing on the box that indicates where this tea is from or who picked it. It's easy to think why someone reading that might assume this actually is manufactured and created in the UK. And I'd argue that Yorkshire tea do this on purpose. This isn't negligence, it's a considered effort. Evidence from this 2012 paper reveals that we have a bias for products produced in countries that we already hold in high regard. To explain this study, let's imagine a scenario. Imagine you are thinking about buying a new pair of running trainers. Usually you go with Nike, but this time you're considering to buy Umbro, a lesser-known brand. Then you find out that Umbro makes their shoes in the UK. You think, oh great, I like that. I always like to support locally made brands, so you're willing to pay a decent price for these shoes. But the next day, you hear that Umbro are moving their production to South Korea. Now, would you still pay the same amount as before? Well, according to the researchers, no, you would not. When Umbro was said to be made in the UK, people were happy to pay £81. But when they heard that the shoes were being made in South Korea, the amount people were willing to pay dropped to £61. Same shoes, different origin, 18% difference in willingness to pay. The researchers ran a similar test with bottled water. They told people the same brand of bottled water either came from France or Austria. Turns out people were willing to pay 33% more for bottled water from France. I believe Tam O'Braan benefited from the same country of origin effect with his tea. By selling Scottish tea, a product from a country that people have exceedingly high associations, positive associations with, he knew that people would be more willing to believe his story because he knew that more people would want to buy Scottish tea.
With modern agronomy techniques, we can take the benefit of brilliant soil, the best soil in the world in Scotland. Very, very good water and abundance of it.
Tam even claims that British producers of tea will obviously be better than Sri Lankan or Indian producers of tea because Brits just know so much more about tea.
Are you hoping to export this and for the Chinese to be drinking Scottish homebrew?
We've got a lot of people interested. The British know a lot about tea. We know the flavour of it. We understand what's in the cup.
Except, of course, we don't. 20% of Brits think Yorkshire tea is made in Yorkshire. Tam is simply using the country of origin effect here. The strong bias that Western customers have for products that come from Western countries. It is, I think, a little bit fraudulent, but from what I can tell, it is extremely commonplace, and I think even Yorkshire tea are using the exact same tactic. To finish up, I asked Jaega to sum up why Tam O'Brann's story got so much attention.
People wanted tea to be grown in Scotland. There's a charm to that story.
And it's a story that so many people wanted to believe.
The 500 kilograms he produces each season isn't much, but his artisanal tea is in great demand, already sold out for the next 4 years.
There was a charm to him. I think it does speak to the power of a good yarn, the power of a good story. He was able to sell his story and he was believed.
We are selling tea to China. We're not selling sand to Arabs or ice to the Eskimos.
He sold his story and, as a consequence, sold lots and lots of tea.